Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the Vibrant Health Podcast, hosted by myself, Jessica Espinoza, and my friend and colleague, Lydia Shatney. I am a wellness coach and educator whose main goal is to help inspire you to live your most vibrant life. You can find me writing about all things health and wellness over at deliciousobsessions.com and jessicaespinoza.com. Lydia is a nutritional therapist and founder of the Divine Health from the InsideOut.com website, where she works with clients all over the country and helps them improve and regain their health using nutritional and mineral balancing protocols. We are so excited that you're taking time out of your day to tune in. But before we get started, since this is a health-related podcast, it should be noted that we are not licensed medical professionals. The information and advice provided in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe for any illness or health issue and should not be construed as medical advice. You should always consult with your medical practitioner before making any changes to your diet, supplementation, medication, or lifestyle. Now, on to today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get this show started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 30 of the Vibrant Health Podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Hey, Lydia, how are you doing? Are you as excited about today's talk as I am?
I am pretty excited. I mean, not that I can be excited about finding out some, about some bad news, essentially. It's kind of an overwhelming topic that we're about to dive into today, and I just ran down to check my basement before the call to see if it was flooding, because I was worried about it, because we have had so much rain and snow, and now it's like warm, it's all melting, so so I'm like, in the back of my mind, always nervous about, the possibilities of something happening in the house. And so I'm psyched to get, talking more about this, get this information out there so that other people can have some basis to, move forward if they need to, or at least have awareness on the topic of mold and mold illness.
Yep, that's huge. So Lydia and I are really excited to have a very special guest on the show today, and we're going to be talking about a topic that you may or may not have heard of, which is mold illness. We are joined by Roop. She's a certified clinical herbalist and clinical nutritionist and one of my dearest friends, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. Lori attended the Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies, where she has completed over 1,300 hours, let me see if I can butcher that anymore, of study in a wide range of herbal medicine topics. And Lori has an absolutely amazing story of survival and a battle with mold illness, and she didn't always know that it was mold illness causing her health problems. So since I know that I can't do that justice, we'll let her tell it. So welcome to the show, Lori. We're so happy you could join us today.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm really happy to be here, and I am very happy to share this story. I didn't know for many, many years as I became more and more ill what was going on for me. There was a lot of damage to our family, and so I would like to help spread the word about, I'm a big advocate of getting the word out about mold illness. So a little bit about, I myself am a mold illness sufferer. I couldn't find any practitioner for years. So about 2008, after the birth of my second child, I started getting sick. And, it wasn't anything that was shutting my life down. I just kept going to doctors. I kept going. I tried everything. Anything that they would suggest, I would try, different practitioners, and I just wasn't getting better. It was just, over time, I was getting more and more sick. In 2010, basically, feels like the wheels fell off my life. I had to start cutting back drastically on different activities and started seeing doctors full time. We eventually had to walk away from our home. At that time, we couldn't. It was the beginning of the recession, and, well, not the beginning, but when we were really affected by it, and we either had to pay for me to go to doctors or to try to save our house. And so we chose to keep sending me to see doctors. Really, I had every diagnosis that they could come up with. So no doctors in the Denver Boulder area knew anything about that mold at that time. No one had a clue. Now, at least, this many years later, there are several doctors that are at least aware of it and are treating it. I do think, unfortunately, there are a lot of ineffective mold illness treatments out there, but everyone gets to choose how they want to treat it. And I do want to say that I will cover mostly the Shoemaker protocol. That's that's kind of the background of where I'm coming from, and know that there's many, many different theories on how to treat mold illness.
Right. Yeah, you really, we don't have time to go into everything that you've gone through, but you really have had, it's a crazy journey. You've really kind of seen the worst that anybody could expect from declining health. And I'm so happy that we finally have answers for you and that you are starting to regain your health. You and I have been friends since 2012, and so I actually saw you when you were at your worst. And so it's thrilling to me to actually be able to talk to you on the phone now and to see you and to actually have you be functioning, because there was a time there that I, honestly didn't know if I was going to see you again because you were bedridden and we couldn't ever hang out or anything like that. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm so glad that you're going to be here talking about it today. So let's talk about just like the basics of mold illness, because this is probably a topic that our listeners have maybe never even heard of. So let's talk about just the very basics, what it is, the definitions, that kind of stuff.
So basic ideas, mold illness is called CIRS. So that is an acronym that stands for, it's CIRS. That is Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. So you can tell from the name of this condition that this condition is all about chronic inflammation. Now, this is not inflammation that is going to show up on standard tests. So like your C-reactive protein, other tests that they might run in an ER or a hospital, it's not going to show inflammation. You're not doing the right test to show this inflammation. You have to get there's very specific tests that Shoemaker uses. It is not a mold allergy, and mold allergy can be a comorbidity to mold illness. So many people think for years, I would say there's a good percentage of people in the mold illness community that think they've had a mold illness, a mold allergy their entire lives. But if they're in the mold community now with us, you can see that they have, in fact, found out they didn't ever have a mold allergy. They, in fact, had CIRS, which is mold illness. I have heard the Shoemaker certified doc, McMahon, he practices down in New Mexico. He either said 1% or 0.1% of people had a mold allergy, a true mold allergy, and the rest have CIRS. At the end of the day, there's really no point in distinguishing between the two. The best course of action is to get tested for CIRS and then to treat that. If you can at least rule out CIRS, then most people can live with a mold allergy. CIRS is a different story.
Right.
So if people want to learn more, go to survivingmold.com. This is the website of Dr. Richie Shoemaker, who started all of this. He writes, it is inflammation within the body that has gone haywire. So I thought that kind of gives people an idea about, it's just this chronic inflammation that never gets shut off. Another basic idea is mold illness is also commonly perceived to be mold growing inside of your body. This is usually almost one of the very first questions that people will ask me. I say I'll have mold illness, and they're like, oh, so you have mold inside your body. That's not it. That's not at all. If you have an internal fungal infection, that again is a comorbidity to CIRS and should be treated. So even a yeast problem like Candida, that's a comorbidity. It should be identified, treated as Candida. Mold illness is immune dysfunction resulting in chronic inflammation. So it's different. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so here is also a good definition from Shoemaker that I feel like kind of encompasses a lot of what he's talking about. Mold illness is a multi-system, multi-symptom illness syndrome that is acquired after exposure to an indoor environment of a water-damaged building. So there are other toxins that can cause this. They're called biotoxins, but really the main one is mold. And we often associate it most with mold because mold is something that we can measure. We have difficulty measuring all the other particulates in a water-damaged building. Science really hasn't caught up with that, but with mold we can measure it. So here is kind of who gets sick from mold illness. 24% of the population has an HLA-DR genetic variance, and it's kind of expressed, so to speak. People, there's lots of stories in the mold community how they knew they lived in a moldy house for years. And then, for some reason, they started getting really, really sick from it. So whether that was just long-term exposure whether some people it's a car accident, some people it's a really intense sickness of a viral infection. They just never really got over it. Dr. Cheryl Tilner, who is my mentor, she's kind of a famous herbalist and naturopath that I mentor with, and she has found out she has mold illness, and she calls this a precipitating event. Some people get infected with Lyme, and that's their precipitating event. Now mold bothers them greatly.
Interesting.
Does that make sense too?
Yeah. So see, it sounds like sometimes, and I think I heard Dr. Shoemaker talk about this on another podcast that I had listened to with him, where sometimes it's a traumatic event that will turn on that gene, essentially. So you may have been living in a water-damaged building or been exposed many times before and never had any issues, but then something catastrophic happened to you.
Yes.
It doesn't even really have to be catastrophic. You just something, a viral infection, bacterial infection, or something like that could turn that gene on, essentially, and then start creating problems. So, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, that's it exactly. You phrased that perfectly. So here is how mold illness works. When someone has the HLA-DR genetic variants, so like I said, 24% of the population has this HLA-DR genetic variants. When they walk into a water-damaged building, and so you inhale all these toxins. Well, first let's go over 76% of the population who doesn't have the HLA-DR. They inhale these toxins. Their body says, hey, that's a toxin. I'm going to tag that antigen. I'm going to create antibodies to it, and I'm going to excrete it. So 3/4 of the population don't have problems with this. Now, let's say the mold there's so much mold in a building, eventually those people will get sick too. But once they leave, their body can catch up with detoxing it out themselves. Those of us with the HLA-DR, and that is expressed, we inhale those toxins. Our body now lacks the ability to see the antigen or the toxin in our system. So our body is like, feels like something's wrong, but we cannot find it. We cannot tag it, and therefore we're not creating antibodies, and we're not excreting it. So now these biotoxins build up in our system. This can be over years, this can be over months, this can be over decades. We just really don't know. Now these biotoxins, they move around the body, causing havoc. Now here's where it gets really bad. Once they bind to cells, they activate the release of inflammatory cytokine chemicals. So this is where the chronic inflammation we were talking about earlier comes into play. Those cytokines don't get shut off as they are supposed to in a normal immune response, but instead to continue to be released. That is what makes people sick, and that's why we call it chronic inflammatory response syndrome.
Interesting. So it's almost like your cells become blind if you have this genetic variant where they can maybe sense that something's wrong, but they can't see the biotoxin or the mycotoxin to go and tag it and remove it from the body.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, it's Dr. U is a Shoemaker certified doctor in Atlanta, Georgia, and he has, it's OU is his name, that's how you spell his last name, and he has a website that has a blog post about this. It's just the most concise and clear description of how the body cannot see these antigens, if someone wanted to look that up and read it.
Okay. We'll put that down in the show notes for sure. I'll make a note to go grab that off his site and link to it.
Cool. And then here's the proper definition of Sears from Shoemaker's website. So again, Surviving Mold, survivingmold.com if people want to go and find more information. Shoemaker writes, an acute and chronic systemic inflammatory response syndrome acquired following exposure to the interior environment of a water-damaged building with resident toxigenic organisms, including, but not limited to, fungi, bacteria, actinomycetes, and mycobacteria, as well as inflammagens such as endotoxins, beta-glucans, hemolysins, proteinases, mannins, and possibly spirocyclic drimanes, as well as volatile organic compounds.
Whew, that's a whole lot of technical terms in there.
Isn't that? And so it kind of gives you an idea, like, it's not just mold, and it's not just mycotoxins.
Right.
Your body is now reacting to things you have never heard of before.
So all of those, you pronounced all of those excellent. I'm kind of skimming through our show notes that you have put together before us, and you pronounced everything perfectly. So those are all, are those living organisms? Like, I mean, we think of, like fungus and bacteria, but like when you start getting into, I guess, what exactly are those things? They're just organisms that live in homes typically, or can be found in homes?
This is something that they are in water-damaged buildings. Now, It would take someone with I'm not really super knowledgeable about all of these particulates, but I do know, like, let's say mycotoxins, that's a big one. That is excreted by mold, and it is not dead, and it is not alive. So you can't kill it. People are like, oh, I have mold, I'll just go kill it, and then I'm fine. No, the mycotoxins are excreted by mold. They get into your house. They get on your clothes. They get in your furniture. They're not alive. They're not dead, so you can't kill them. They're more of a gas, so they exist in a gaseous state. So they infiltrate everything, and now you're reacting to them. So people are like, oh, look, my house has mold. I'm going to go move to this other apartment. They take all their stuff. They think, oh, this new apartment is fine. I'm perfectly fine here. They bring all their stuff, and it has mycotoxins all over all of their belongings, especially porous items, and now they're reacting to the stuff they brought from their previous home.
Okay. That makes sense.
I know.
It's crazy to think of something not being alive and not being dead in a way. Like, just causing all this havoc on you, and you can't kill it.
Right. I know. It's like all these new ways of looking at disease that we just really haven't done before. I think it makes it really difficult for people to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, and it's just so new, too. I mean, we're really just starting to have information about this. So it's not like we can just go to PubMed and pull a bunch of scientific studies and things like that, on the topic. We're really starting to kind of like pave the path for this type of research.
Well, there actually is a lot of research on mold illness. There is so much research on, because it's a really big topic. This isn't like, hey, we got one test, we test for it, you're done. It's not like that. We'll go over the testing later on, and we'll discuss that. But there is more information on mold illness, more research studies that you could find on PubMed than many other chronic illnesses that are out there. It's kind of astounding.
Wow.
Yes. Shoemaker, on his website, survivingmold.com, he has a bunch listed on his website. I was trying to think exactly where, but you could look through there, find a lot of the research he has. My doctor is Dr. Robin Thompson. She's Shoemaker certified. When she wrote, so to get certified, they go through an entire process, and they have to write a paper about it when they're done, something along those lines. Anyway, she told me that she had 50 references just on her one paper that was maybe 3 or 4 pages long.
Wow.
They're the Toxic Mold Australia website. My friends Caleb Rudd and Jason Mullen run that. They've created that website. They have a whole entire list of research on that website also. So it's out there.
Okay.
What we cannot prove is that our judicial system does not accept that mold causes people harm.
Right.
So until that precedent is set, we're kind of stuck. It's insurance won't cover it. Insurance doesn't believe it's happening.
Yeah, we can't even get into that because that's a huge.
I know, right?
Worms. I mean, because literally, with the number of water damaged buildings that there are in the country, and potentially the number of people that are suffering from this, I mean, it could bankrupt the system completely.
Yeah, to add in about that, I'm going to go over this later, Jessica. The NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, in 2011, their own statistics said that 50% of buildings in the United States have water damage. That's from the CDC, and we all know that could be very well underreported.
Exactly. Yeah.
So to think you haven't gone into a water damaged building,
very
unlikely.
Pretty slim to none.
Every house I've lived in has had water damage.
Wow. Yes.
Well, I mean, old basement, got some water at one point,
Yeah.
That's so common.
Yeah,
Yep.
it is probably much higher than 50% because we know that the CDC reports are always usually underreported when it comes to anything. So it could be much higher than that. Okay, so before we get too distracted, I don't want to pull you off of your outline. So let's move on to your next idea.
Okay, so the next one is like what causes mold illness. So we've kind of covered that. We talked about the people who are susceptible to biotoxins. And I told you I was going to give you an idea of the other biotoxins that are well known. So there are dinoflagellates from Pfiesteria. They've had problems with bodies of water out east, I believe, sometime in the early 2000s. So fish were showing up dead, and it was a Pfiesteria infestation. Cyanobacteria from blue-green algae blooms. I've known people that have left one house because it had mold damage, moved into another house, and right on their property was a little pond that had blue-green algae blooms.
Oh, right.
So now they were right in the thick of it again.
Yeah.
Ciguatera fish poisoning is another one. The toxins from Lyme and the co-infections is another biotoxin. And venomous bites by spiders, snakes, jellyfish, and a few other things. These are some of the other biotoxins that can exist.
Interesting.
Like every once in a while, somebody went to like Hawaii and had like fresh fish, literally pulled out straight from the ocean. Sushi, it wasn't cooked, it wasn't even flash frozen, which is what most sushi is it's flown over to the United States. And they'll pick up like ciguatera poisoning.
Right.
And so it'll then prime them for mold illness. But I've only heard of a couple. I'm not a doctor, and I've just heard of a couple people that's how they started. Yes.
Scary.
So, yeah. So most people are getting exposed to water-damaged buildings. That's where this is coming from. I talked about the NIOSH. And, here's another good quote from Shoemaker. The complex mixture of contaminants present in the air and in the dust in water-damaged buildings form a toxic chemical stew. So that just kind of goes back to when we were talking about there's so many different particulates and it's not just mold.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so I'll go over some things that, how do we identify it ourselves? Like, where's all the scary stuff? We can kind of let that be and let's go and do something proactive because I think that often helps people too.
Right, right.
Most people with mold illness, they don't see mold in their home. It takes testing and then trying to find the hidden mold. Here are some common problems in a water-damaged building. Construction defects like poor ventilation and HVAC systems. We don't see it as much in Colorado, but I know a lot of people have mold growing on the coils of their air conditioners.
Right.
Which is crazy. Okay. My friends out east, they have this problem quite a bit. We don't see it quite as much in Colorado.
I'm in the east.
You what?
I'm in the east.
Yeah, that's my friends out there. They have they're like every building has it.
Why is it more common in the east?
More humidity.
Yes.
And moisture.
Okay.
The humidity is what.
For the longest time, I really didn't think mold was anything that we needed to worry about here in Colorado. We have such a dry climate. Humidity is typically very, very low, even in the winter. And, so you think of places like this in Arizona and New Mexico and stuff like that, and you kind of like the more desert-like climates, and you don't think that, you're like, well, I don't have mold problems, or like we don't have dangerous molds or whatever. So this really has, over the last year, I've, learned more about this and realized that this happens no matter where you live. It's not isolated to just, for the longest time, you think just back east and down south where it's 100% humidity and lots of rain and stuff like that all the time. This really can happen no matter where you're at.
Right, right. And think about, too, there are different types of mold. Some of them take more water and some of them are low moisture mold. So molds exist in the ground. And so you can have low moisture molds in your house. You can have mold that grows on the dust in your vents. And it's going to be very low moisture mold, and yet you can still have a problem.
Right.
Yeah, crazy things like that. So faulty construction of crawl spaces and inadequate building design, failed technology like flat roofs. New Mexico is purported to have one of the highest numbers of water damaged buildings in the nation. Is that why? Because they have so much flat roof buildings? I'm not sure. Maybe they just have low moisture molds there. Incomplete basements exposed to saturated groundwater conditions. But here's the big one. It's just not correcting water intrusions and leaks. And we've been told as a society that mold cannot hurt you for years. And that idea is just, it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the most problematic molds per Shoemaker that he sees, like he took these 5 and put them into the Hurts Me, and we'll talk about the Hurts Me later too, is Aspergillus penicilloides, Aspergillus versicolor, Chaetomium globusum, Stachybotrys chartarum, and Wallemia sebae. Stachybotrys is what is commonly known as black mold. So that's
what we hear about all the time.
Yes. Yes. That's the one people think that if that's dangerous, that's the worst one. If I don't have that, then I'm okay. But unfortunately, people have gotten very, very ill, especially from the molds that I just talked about that are other than Stacky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just forgot what I was going to say about that.
That's all right. Yeah, black mold was the only one that I ever knew of until about a year ago. I had no idea that there were so many different types of molds and that there were other molds that would hurt you other than the black mold.
Right. So let's talk about testing your home and work. Because these are the 2 places that people are they spend most of their time. So these would be the first 2 places like a Shoemaker doctor would recommend that you get tested. So the company is called Micrometrics. And this is the company that Shoemaker endorses. Greg Weatherman, who is probably the leading expert on remediation and mold inspection out there in the United States today. And because for people with Sears, he knows the industry inside out. For people with Sears, you can remediate your home for mold according to industry standards. So for 76% of the population, that's going to be perfectly fine. But industry standards for someone with Sears is not going to be enough. So Greg Weatherman is really the expert on that. He only recommends Micrometrics too. So there's 2 tests within Micrometrics, and one is called a Hurts Me, and it tests for the 5 molds that I just talked about. These are the top 5 problematic molds that Shoemaker has seen with his clients. And Shoemaker's seen over 7,000 clients since, I believe, 1998. Yeah, that's a lot. He's seen a lot of different variation and kind of picked out like, hey, this is what I'm seeing over and over and over. That Hurts Me costs $125, or there is an ERMI, which tests for 36 molds, and that costs $290. So, Jessica, do you think we should go? The what?
It's not horrible cost-wise. Yeah.
Right.
Now, when you order this test, does someone do the test for you, or do they teach you how to do it?
Actually, neither.
Oh.
So, okay, that is a good indication. We will actually talk about right now how to take that test. And I'm going to put this on my website. I'm going to write a blog post about it and put this on my website because it is really one of the most common questions that I get. If you're doing just a quick check, often I recommend people use the Hurts Me, and doctors will recommend people use the Hurts Me. If you just have zero money, maybe it Hurts Me. But if you own your home and you're trying to think about, like, hey, I might need to do remediation, that's often when people will recommend that they do an ERMI, which tests for 36 molds as opposed to just 5. It just gives you a better idea of exactly what's going on in your house. It just gives you an expanded view of what's going on as opposed to a Hurts Me.
Right.
But here is how you take the test. So you go to Micrometrics, and you can call them and then you have to download the form to send in. So this will eventually be on my website, but for right now you can call Micrometrics and they'll tell you, like, go to this link, download this form, and then you'll have to fill the form out. So you get a Swiffer, a box of, like, the Swiffer pads. Right, Jessica, the ones I just told you to go look for?
The dry ones? Yeah, they're the dry ones, not the wet ones.
Right, the dry ones. The second you open that, put it in a plastic bag. This is going to be the box of Swiffers. Don't use the box of Swiffers you've had at home for a while. Buy a brand new box of Swiffers. Open it up. You're going to take one of the Swiffers pads out. You're going to put the others in the box into a bag so that in case you have mold in your home, you're not contaminating your entire box of Swiffers. You're then, let's say you just want to get a picture overall of the entire house. So then you're going to take that pad, that Swiffer pad, and you can wear a glove, but you're going to walk around the house and wipe dust in every single room. My goal is to wipe 10 spots of dust in every single room so I can get a good idea of what's going on in there. A lot of times we tell people wait 4 weeks so you have the dust build up. Yeah, because you have to have enough dust. If you don't have enough.
I already have enough.
I know, right? That's right. I know. I was like, I didn't have any trouble with that.
I'm pretty sure most of us can find dust, right?
Right. And so you're going to want to cover at least half of one side of a Swiffer pad. Now, if you send it in without enough dust, Micrometrics will tell you. But the more dust you can get on your Swiffer pad and send to Micrometrics, it's just a better view of your house. And you're already spending, either $150 to $300. So might as well get as much dust as you can. Take that Swiffer pad that has dust from every single room, put it into a plastic baggie. So then you're going to return to Micrometrics your form that you got off the website. You're going to return your Swiffer with a plastic baggie, and you're going to put your check. And you're going to mail that to Micrometrics. Now, for the ERMI, you can have them send you a cloth from their lab. They'll actually do that for a Hurts Me Too, but it costs like $25. And with this illness, I'm always looking for ways to save a couple bucks because it's so expensive. So Swiffer pads do work, but you can, from Micrometrics, order that test to be sent to you. You can get the cloth from them and use it and then send it in, or you can just buy a Swiffer. Does that all make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that is the easy way to do the testing for your home. So you don't have to hire someone to come out to your home. You can just do it yourself. Mm-hmm. So air sampling is the industry standard. And this is where they just go in your home and they're going to take a sample of air, maybe like through vacuum or something else, and like right out of the middle of the room. Shoemaker has written extensively about this, about what he does not find that to be sensitive enough for people with mold illness. So again, the industry standard is probably going to be okay for people who don't have the HLA-DR variants and aren't sick with mold illness. But
I was going to ask if we could just re-clarify that for people, because I think, when I first started learning about this, that's kind of where my head got stuck. So the industry standard and some of these toxic molds and stuff if you're just a normal person and you don't have mold illness and you don't have the HLA, the variation, you may never have any reactions to these. You could be living in a place that has these molds.
Absolutely.
And you could be perfectly fine.
Yep.
So when we're talking about all this, we're really specifically talking about people with mold illness, and even more specifically, people with HLA. Because can you have mold illness and not have the genetic issue?
There's there's roughly 5% or less of people that will not have the HLA-DR, and yet they'll be just as sick with mold illness as the rest of us.
Okay, it's a small percentage.
Very small percentage. But Shoemaker likes to say, nothing in biology is 100%.
Right, we all know that.
Right? So there's always going to be some exceptions here or there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yes,
so
I'm glad you brought
the average person with no health problems and don't have mold illness or whatever, then, an air sampling could be just fine for you, or even just living in a place that might have some water damage may not be an issue for you. But
absolutely.
Specifically, these are the people that actually do have the mold illness issues where it's very dangerous.
Exactly. Okay. So just to go back about air sampling, There's been many homes that have had air sampling done. The air sampling, because it's not as sensitive, it does not show any problems. And then they've done a test with micrometrics, and the house has major problems and has been the source of sickness for the people. Another reason, Stachybotrys is a heavy, sticky spore, so it rarely shows up in air sampling. And actually, if you have air sampling and you have Stachy show up in your air sampling, you probably better get out of there that second. That's a really bad infestation. Air sampling is a snapshot in time, and it only catches spores that happen right in that instance. So that's just one of the problems with air sampling for people who are sick with mold illness. But again, now that we're talking about micrometrics, I need to bring up the fact that no test is 100% perfect. I do know people that clearly have mold illness. They've had all the labs done. They walk into their home, they feel way worse. They've done a micrometrics test, and it shows no problem. It's because no test is completely 100%. So you have to always, there's a margin of error everywhere, and you always have to be aware of that. Here are some other options I suggest, like to the people in my mold illness support group. Use yourself. If you have symptoms in your home, like if you walk in and you start sneezing, or if you feel fatigued, or you feel tired, or anything, and you feel like you react this way every single time you walk into your home, that right there will tell you more than any other test that you could use. So that's your first indication, is if you feel bad somewhere, don't go there. You'll also need to decipher your ERMI or your hurts me. So for an ERMI, now this is going to get kind of technical, but I do want to say it just so that people know that information is out there. So when you get an ERMI, at the bottom, it's going to give you a score. So according to Shoemaker's test results, when you get the ERMI testing, ensure that there is no exposure to a building with an ERMI greater than 2 if the patient's MSH is less than 35 and C4A is less than 20. So when
those are two medical tests, correct?
Yes, those are lab tests, blood tests that we'll talk about later on.
Okay.
So you can't, if you have a greater ERMI, you can't have your MSH less than 35 and your C4A less than 20,000 and then have something over a 2.
Okay.
I don't know if I said that in any better explained way.
Nope, that makes sense.
Okay, good. And then you can't have an ERMI greater than -1 if your MSH is less than 35 and your C4A is greater than 20,000. So that's how you interpret your ERMI. And that information is on survivingmold.com. For Hurts Me, you're actually going to have to plug your numbers that you get on your Hurts Me. You're going to have to plug it into a form on survivingmold.com to get your final score. But you can get on any of the mold groups and ask people, and they'll do it for you, too, if that helps.
Okay.
And for your Hurts Me, you'll ultimately want to score less than 11. So something I also recommend to people is hire an educated mold inspector, and preferably one who is knowledgeable about SEERS. And I talked about Greg Weatherman. His website is Surviving Remediation. I have no financial ties with him. You can read about his credentials on there. He has the most knowledge about remediation for people with SEERS. And you can also just make like a phone or FaceTime or Skype appointment with him. He'll look at your house, read your ERMI, tell you what he thinks, and then you can talk to him about, remediation where you might have to use local remediators too.
Where is he located? Is he in Colorado or is he out of state?
No, I believe he's out east.
Oh, okay. So.
And I'd have to look that up. I don't think I know where he is exactly.
Oh, that's okay. We'll include his information down in the show notes as well, so that if people want to contact him and maybe learn more or check out his site and learn more, they can easily find it. So. Right.
Cool. Good. So one other thing to talk about with people who have mold illness, let's say someone's been sick for a while, and like Dr. McMahon, Shoemaker certified doctor in New Mexico, he talks about that we just don't know why some people get sicker than others. It's not always about exposure. It's not about having the dreaded genes. It's not always about these things. Some people just get really, really sick, and some people just can be in the same house and they'll never get as sick. We don't know why that is. But I do want to bring up that someone who has had mold illness for years, now let's say that they test their home, it tests fine, they don't think there's any problems, they're like, well, I'm not around mold. Those mycotoxins, because you have the HLA-DR, they build up in your system. So you cannot excrete those. And most people, every once in a while, will have someone in the mold community that they can go to a safe place and they'll just automatically feel better. But someone like me, never happened. I could be in a pristine area and I never felt better. So I had to have outside intervention, which is what I'm talking about with the Shoemaker protocol. And that is you follow the protocol and his steps so that they will take the mycotoxins out of your body for you. And so someone can say, hey, but I don't have mold in my house, but I'm still sick, so it must not be mold illness. That could very well not be true. It could be mold illness, and you won't know until you get tested, until you get the blood tests, because those mycotoxins could be built up in your system, and they're still causing you problems until you get them out.
Right. So I know we're going to dive into next, like who should consider getting tested for SEERs, but I think let's offer people a little bit of hope now, because I don't want everybody to be like
right?
so down and overwhelmed.
It does feel that way.
It's terrible about things. Like, so SEERs is completely treatable, right?
Absolutely.
People can go through the treatment and get on with their life and be healthy and right? So it's not like a death sentence. It's not.
No. It's treatable. Yes, it is. This is something especially for people when we catch it early, or kids. Kids and people, we catch it early enough. These people, I hear about these people all the time. Sometimes they don't even miss work. Sometimes they're just like, I just felt bad. It was hard to go to work. I just did the treatment. I'm better. I'm great. I'm fine. They never look back. It's great. So that's really my push to help people, because when people start getting really sick, it makes it a lot harder. And so I'm kind of speaking from a person who's been really, really sick. So it does sound dire. That's why. Because I am in a community where people are super sick. But if you get tested now and you deal with it right away, it's amazing. You'll see amazing results. Yes.
So there's light at the end of the tunnel for anybody that's listening who may be, feeling very stressed out and anxious about this.
Thank you.
Suspecting that they could have some problems. Get the testing done. We'll talk more about that in a second, but get the testing done and get the treatment done, and you will most likely be able to move on with your life and recover. So, which it's awesome that this is completely treatable, because so many times, especially with autoimmune issues, or if you get a diagnosis of chronic fatigue, like there's really no good ways of treating it. So to get some sort of diagnosis and have a very clear-cut way of treating it is sometimes a relief for a lot of people. So, so I wanted to take a minute to try to
thank you.
shine some light on us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So now that we've had that little break, everything's going to be okay. Yes. Let's talk about who should consider getting tested for SEERs.
Yes.
Because it sounds like a lot of people may want to consider it at some point, especially if maybe they've been dealing with health problems that are not getting better.
Right.
And things like that. So let's talk about that.
So I almost always, I fall right in the chronic illness community. So my parents get calls from people they've known in years past. Anyway, people that have a diagnosis where there is no cure, you should rule this out. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's some crazy diagnosis that they came up from and they're like, you're going to, you only have a couple years to live, or you're just going to have to live with this pain. If it has the diagnosis with no cure, you should at least rule out mold illness. Here are the other super common diagnoses: fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple sclerosis, depression, stress, allergy, post-traumatic stress disorder, somatization, irritable bowel syndrome, attention deficit disorder.
Pretty common stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and Lyme. I have heard Dr. Shoemaker say in different things you can watch online, listen to him speak, that most people that he sees with chronic fatigue and chronic Lyme, they've all turned out to have mold illness.
Interesting.
And they have gotten better with it. Because that's the thing. We know lots of people with chronic Lyme will stay sick for years and years and years and years and just continually treat, and they're just not getting better. And then I'm one of them. I fall into that. And then once I got into mold illness treatment, I started to recover quickly.
Right. Okay.
And Shoemaker also says, if any of those diagnoses that I just read off, if that's an actual correct diagnosis, they won't get better with mold illness treatment. So bottom line is just, yeah. So bottom line is just get tested. Rule it out, find out if it's a problem. If it is, and then you can treat it.
So those diagnoses, they could be they could be a byproduct of the mold illness. So that's why you mean if they are actually a correct diagnosis, then if you treat the mold illness, that diagnosis would still be there. You would still be having those same problems. Where if those were being triggered by mold illness, you treat the mold illness and those may resolve in some cases?
I know several people personally that they were told they had multiple sclerosis. They had it for decades. They thought it's incurable, so they just went on with their life. They did mold illness treatment. They did not have multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
They had mold illness.
That's huge. That's absolutely incredible.
And chronic fatigue, too.
And chronic fatigue is one of those, when doctors can't figure out what's wrong with you, they lump it into chronic fatigue.
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's kind of a catch-all for things that doctors can't explain.
Exactly.
So, interesting. Yes. Very interesting.
And who else to get tested? This is what I personally see a lot. If you've been seeing doctors and their normal treatments aren't working for you, I can't tell you how many doctors I saw that they were successful doctors here in the Denver, Boulder area. And they're like, you know what? This works for almost everyone. I don't know why it's not working for you.
Right.
Well, that is a sign. I wish I had known about mold illness, and I wish I could have gotten tested earlier. Because that's a sign. If you have leaky gut that won't heal with the standard functional medical approach, such as diet changes and supplements, Dr. Tim Jackson is a doctor I like to read. He writes a lot about this with leaky gut. That's how he figured out he had mold illness.
Interesting.
And very simply, I kind of explain that MSH, it's melanocyte stimulating hormone. This is something that gets lowered when you have mold illness. MSH is a mucous membrane integrity protector. So once it's lowered, you don't have that in your gut, and so your gut gets leaky. And it's not going to heal until you can get that MSH up. And that's just one of the reasons that people with mold illness have such terrible gut issues. And then anyone with chronic Lyme.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I talked about before, anyone with chronic Lyme should get tested. If you're not getting well with your chronic Lyme treatment, you should rule out mold illness.
Good to know. I meet more and more people. I feel like every week I meet a new person that just got diagnosed with Lyme. Like it seems like it's becoming more and more prevalent. Way more so. Like I've met more people in the last year that have been diagnosed with Lyme than I think I have my entire life up to that point. So it's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about then common symptoms, because we talked a little bit about the potential diagnosis that you may have received that could maybe be triggered by the mold illness. But let's talk about like the most common symptoms that you're seeing in the mold community for people that are suffering from this.
Yes, and this is a list from Dr. Shoemaker. So having seen over 7,000 patients and now having trained, I believe there's 13 doctors on the list at this point. These are the most common symptoms. Most people are definitely not going to have all of them, but these are the common ones that he'll see. Fatigue, weakness, aches, muscle cramp, unusual pain, ice pick pain, headache, light sensitivity. That was a big one for me. Red eyes, blurred vision, tearing, sinus problems, cough, shortness of breath, abdominal pain, diarrhea, joint pain, morning stiffness, memory issues, focus concentration issues, word recollection issues, decreased learning of new knowledge, confusion, disorientation, skin sensitivity, mood swings, appetite swings, sweats, especially night sweats. Now, a lot of people, especially in the Lyme community, think that the only thing that can cause night sweats are babesia. Not true. Mold illness can too. Temperature regulation or dysregulation problems. I had that one terribly also. Excessive thirst, increased urination, static shocks, numbness, tingling, vertigo, metallic taste, and tremors.
A lot of stuff on that list.
Yes. And a lot of people will try to kind of figure out if they have mold illness by asking another mold illness patient what their symptoms were. Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh, hey, what's your symptoms? So I want to see if I have. There's so much variability in people's symptoms that you cannot figure out or diagnose yourself for mold illness just based on symptoms. Right. Dr. Shoemaker has a story in one of his books about people that lived in a really high-end condo, and the entire condo just had terrible problems. A lot of them got really, really sick. And all of them had different issues. It just can express very differently in many different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's across the board, really. I mean, you can't necessarily rely if somebody has the exact same diagnosis as you, like I have Hashimoto's disease. I can't go to another Hashi's person and have exactly the same situation and experience that person has had. So, I mean, we each are so unique and individual that symptoms are going to manifest in different ways for all of us. So, let's talk. All right, more light at the end of the tunnel, everyone. So
yes.
Let's talk a little bit about testing yourself and kind of some things that you can do if you suspect this could be an issue, but you're feeling kind of overwhelmed. Kind of what are some first steps and where can people go from this point?
So the very first step, super easy, super accessible, and cheap. It's the VCS. It's Visual Contrast Sensitivity Test. And you can find it on Dr. Shoemaker's site. It costs $15. So it's a really great way just to get that test done. Just start collecting information. You'll want to keep that information. That way you can take it to your doctor if you need to go later. I do have some tips about taking the VCS test.
And can you explain a little bit about what the VCS test is? Like, why would taking a test on a computer be helpful? Like, is it...
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like so that people know why they're even bothering taking it.
Yes. So the VCS test actually came from the tox world. And so when you have toxicity in your system, the capillaries on the back of your retina are really extremely sensitive. So they're one of the first places that are affected. So if you have inflammation from toxicity, even that you might not be able to see in other parts of your body, those capillaries back there are affected, and so it affects how you can see certain images. So the test is you looking at different lines and different ways that they are, like sometimes they're slanted to the right, sometimes they're slanted to the left. I think sometimes they're slanted vertically. And so the more inflammation you have in the back of your eyeball there, and you're not going to feel this. You're not going to feel that inflammation. You are unable to see those differences in the lines.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Really interesting.
I know, right? It's pretty fascinating. I always tell people take on multiple computers in your home, and especially if different rooms have different lighting. So, and you have to follow the directions for the VCS test. Sometimes that's hard. It's pretty hard for people the sicker they get. But, I believe if I remember right, you have to be 18 inches away from the screen. You have to have adequate lighting. But I do recommend that people take it on different computers in their home. And this is anecdotal. I've just heard this in the mold community. Don't take it on an iPad. People that fail it all the time take it on an iPad and they pass. So for some reason, the screen must be different on those. I'm not really sure. I've just heard that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then do be aware, Shoemaker writes about this, there is an 8% false pass. And we don't know why that is. That means that these people who are the 8% false pass will take that test And it doesn't matter how sick they are. They can be super duper sick with mold illness, and they will pass that test every time. I'm one of that 8%. I couldn't walk. I had to hold onto the walls of my house to go to the bathroom the first time I took that test. And I passed.
Wow.
So for some reason, 8%, they're going to pass no matter what. And really the gold standard is to take the handheld VCS, and you can usually get those done in your shoemaker doc's office, but you're not going to use one of those at home.
Mm-hmm.
But I even passed that. But for everyone else, for 92% of people, this is one of the most valuable tools that you can have, because for $15, you can kind of see, like, you may say, hey, look, I failed right away. I don't feel that bad. Hey, this is great. I'm not that sick yet. Let's deal with this. Let's get it taken care of. And also, then you can use the VCS when you have, let's say you go into a building that is moldy and you think you've been affected. People can track their recovery and their re-exposure with a VCS test.
Huh, interesting.
Yes, it's an invaluable tool. My doctor is always upset that she can't use that with me. She's like, oh, you're one of the people that pass. I'm like, I know. But it's a great tool for people. It's right there in your home, super easy to use. Fantastic. You don't have to go to a doctor. You don't have to pay someone yet. You can just do it right there.
Right.
Shoemaker also adds that 0.1% of people have a false fail. So that means if you fail, you really need to look into getting more testing done. And to be very clear, if you fail, that is not a diagnosis unto itself that you have mold illness. That is simply the first step telling you should get more testing done.
Mm-hmm.
So people can take that. They may fail. Do not immediately think you have mold illness. You might not. Just use that as your next step to get more testing. And maybe that next testing will show that, like, I don't know, maybe your computer screen was like that. Maybe there wasn't enough light in your room. Who knows? It's not a diagnosis for mold illness.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the starting place for people if they're interested. They could go online and take that. We'll leave the link down there in the show notes so you can click on it and go straight over there and take that. So what would the next step be? So say they have failed or say they passed and they still are suspecting that something could be up.
The next step is to contact a shoemaker certified doc that knows the protocol. And so those lists of doctors are on the Surviving Mold website. Okay. There are a few doctors out there that I would trust to recommend to people that are not shoemaker certified and yet are getting people well. But, there's just a few here and there that I know of. And so really the most knowledgeable base is the people that have actually gone through the certification. Okay. And that's who I recommend. Different people are going to have different opinions on that.
Right.
But there's the most research on the shoemaker protocol. He has seen the most patients. It's just it's different. When you've had 7,000 patients, McMahon has seen over 700. He was the first shoemaker trained doc. That large number of patients is a little bit different than seeing someone locally who's like, yeah, I kind of know it, and they've seen 3 people. Mm-hmm. I was so sick, I needed something that was tried and true, and the shoemaker protocol is. So you can go to the list of doctors on the survivingmold.com website, and this is what I recommend to people. I recommend that they call every doctor on the list, except for the Australian ones, of course, and ask them different questions like, what is your wait list? Do you accept insurance? Do you accept my insurance? Where do I stay when I fly in? I would say that most people with mold illness have to fly to see a doctor.
Right. So there may not be one in your local area. If there is, you're lucky.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And most shoemaker docs, so you can ask them when you call them too, like many of the doctors, once you see them in person for the first time, all your subsequent visits can be over Skype or phone.
Okay, so you wouldn't have to fly to them every single time you need to.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And not even
get bendy really quick.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And I know of other docs too. There are a few on the list, and you call them and ask them. but they don't even require you to come in for that first visit in person either. There may be one or two on the list that will let you do that. It just kind of depends on the individual situation. But that's just different questions that I would ask the doctor. And, I know it all, like you said, it all sounds so dire. I was really, really sick. I just didn't get a diagnosis for a long time, and I got really sick because of no diagnosis. This is genetic. We know for sure that I got it from my mom. She was just diagnosed herself, maybe within the past month. She was never that sick. She never had to quit work. She went to Dr. McMahon, and he's like, you know what? Probably in 3 or 4 months, you're going to be good.
Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty quick.
Yeah, that's amazing. That should offer a lot of hope to people who, you just can't base, I think, I've had some experiences with a friend who lost everything, her house and all of that, to mold, and they've been dealing with the repercussions of that. And so you always hear all of these horror stories about mold and how sick you get and like how it affects your life. And so I think it's really important for people to know that you cannot base, if you do have fears or you do suspect mold illness, that you cannot base what's going to happen in your life against what you're seeing other people put on the internet. Because I feel like a lot of times we only pay attention and we only see the really, really, really bad. We don't see the people who are still functioning really well. They're still working. They're still taking care of their family, but they just maybe are not feeling as good as they could, or the people that recover really quick and move on with their life. I think we need to really let people know that you can't, maybe try not to pay attention to those dire situations as much. Don't let that feed into your worry and your fear. And remember that there are lots of people out there who have been treated successfully and have gone on to live, healthy lives. They've gotten over it and past it and have regained their health. So I think that's really important, because I feel like this topic is really scary for a lot of people.
Right.
Just because you hear all of the horror stories, and that's kind of what we have in our minds now, and we don't hear a whole lot of the hope. So
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is, that's exactly it. I get contacted all the time because I run a mold group myself and through other groups, and people are always contacting me. Sometimes they're super sick, but I also get contacted by people that are just barely sick. They're out there working. They're out there living their lives, and they just might have like a little question. They're like, hey, what about this? I've had this. My shoe doc didn't cover it. What do you think? Mm-hmm. And you don't see them online because they are out living.
Right. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
Good. Yeah. I feel like this episode has been kind of a downer probably for a lot of people. So I want to make sure that we're throwing those tidbits of hope out there and letting them know that this is treatable and very successful.
Absolutely.
Okay. So somebody I think we're getting close to wrapping up for this episode. I know we're going to have you back on for another episode in the future, but so say somebody has contacted Shoemaker Doc, they have picked one out that they want to work with. How does the doctor go about diagnosing SEERS? What can a patient kind of expect from that process?
Well, I'll go through this really quickly, and then I thought maybe we could go through it more in depth in the next one also, because I am going to run out of time. I have to pick my kids up from school.
Yes.
But I do, because I definitely wanted to go over pitfalls too. Okay. So really quickly about what people can expect when they see their mold doc. So it's usually going to be a 1 to 2 hour appointment. Sometimes they can go up to 4. It just depends on the different doctor. But they're going to ask you, they're going to go through different criteria, because one test by itself will never diagnose you with mold illness. Like just the VCS or just one blood test, never an adequate diagnosis. Dr. Shoemaker has set this up because there's so many different patients that it is a compilation of all of these tests that he's done, that all of these together then do indicate a diagnosis for mold illness or not. Mm-hmm. So things like a multi-symptom illness, have you been exposed? They rule some things out. Then the Shoemaker Lab panel, so that's the blood test that you'd take. Do you have dysregulation in those blood tests that are characteristic of mold illness? Do they fail their VCS test? and we already talked about that doesn't have to be, you don't have to fail to have it. So all these things together is how they do make a positive diagnosis or not.
Right. Okay.
And then I really wanted to go over these pitfalls too, because these are a lot of the questions that I get from running my mold group and just being in a lot of the other Facebook groups, also being part of the mold community. And these are some pitfalls that people fall into, and it prohibits them from getting the treatment they need. So if people don't see mold in their house, they think this doesn't apply to them. But we've kind of talked about it can. Mm-hmm. Just rule it out if you have any questions. People have other diagnoses that they attribute their symptoms to, so they don't get tested for mold illness, when in fact these symptoms can be alleviated with mold illness treatment. Mm-hmm. I've seen this quite a bit.
Right.
People also forget what normal feels like. They've been sick for so long. They don't even recognize their symptoms anymore until these symptoms are removed via mold illness treatment. And I have to say that one of mine was anxiety. And I don't even know if anybody previous in my life would have thought I had a terrible problem with anxiety. But now that I'm going through treatment, I'm like, is this what this feels like? I don't have that edginess anymore.
Right.
I don't have that like, I just thought that was part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing how calm I feel now. It's just really, it's kind of beautiful. People also cannot complete the first step of the Shoemaker protocol, and yes, it's super hard. It is getting out of the mold. It's not fair. It's difficult. It'll ruin your financial goals for some people. Sometimes people have a terrible issue with this, but getting out of what's making you sick is just the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the biggest step, the most important step. And once that's done, people's lives change dramatically.
Right.
So,
yeah, that would definitely be the hardest thing, I think, for most people is because you really, if you have to get out of where you're living, if where you're living is causing the problem, I guess, first of all, you would have to identify that where you're living is actually causing the problem.
Right.
But if it is, then that just opens up a whole lot of can of worms, especially if you're married or you have a family, and, uprooting everybody's lives could be pretty traumatic. So,
yes,
I can see that being a really tough one for people.
And there are several people in my mold group that just never had like a terrible, they just weren't like just terribly sick. They've remediated their homes. They're fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it took. They're great. They've remediated. They've gotten through it. They're moving past.
Right. See, more hope. There's more hope there.
I know. I know. I was like, again, it's sounding really dire.
Okay.
But like you said,
awesome.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that this treatment is available. I'm really thankful that I found it. But this condition is treatable. That really is just, you can take care of this. You will get past this.
Absolutely. Okay. This has been great. I think this is an excellent primer for people. This is longer than our normal episodes, so we appreciate everybody sticking through, but I think this is really important information for people to know about. And I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us today and going through all of this and sharing all of your knowledge with people.
Well,
I'm excited to do the follow-up. We're definitely going to do another episode with Lori, probably in the next couple of months, so stay tuned for that. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up? Or Lydia? Is Lydia still there?
I am. I'm here. Thank you so much, both of you, for this podcast. I'm really just kind of hanging out here listening to all this information. I had nothing to do with this information today. It's all Jessica getting together with Lori and pulling this together. So I appreciate both of you for this, because I work with clients myself, and there are those people that are just stuck, and so this is all in one place. It's all this great information that I can, potentially share with some people, and I'm going to look into it for myself. I actually just ordered my test while you guys were chit-chatting. I'm going to do it.
No way.
Nice.
So why not? $15 is nothing. It's nothing. So anyway, but this is such a great resource for people. So thank you both, and thank you, Lori, for your time and really just you're generous being here with us and giving us all of this time and putting this together. So
thank you. I am just so thankful that people are willing to listen and let me talk about it just so I can get the word out, and maybe some people won't have as many problems as I have had with this, and we start catching it early. People are just going to get well, and this is not going to be a big problem anymore.
Yep, that is fantastic.
Oh, and awesome. I did want to throw in one other thing. My website is loriroop.com, and right now I do have a page on there for mold illness, and right now it just talks pretty specifically about what I offer in the community, but in the future I will have more and more information about, as I get it into my website, about mold illness and different links, and I know you'll have a bunch of terrific ones right on your page here from what we've talked about. So
absolutely. We'll link your website down there as well. Do you have a newsletter set up for people who are wanting more information? I can also make sure we link to your newsletter if you have that as well.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we'll include, check out the show notes. We'll include gobs of links down there, specific stuff to the Surviving Mold site and the Greg Weatherman site, the VCH test, Dr. U, Lori's site. So I'll list as much stuff as I possibly can, so it makes it easy for you guys to just pop over there and find the information that you need. So
That's awesome, Jessica. Awesome. I'm so glad you guys are covering this. This was great.
Well, thank you. We were honored to have you on, and we are looking forward to the follow-up episode that we do. So definitely stay tuned for that. And I guess we will go ahead and let everybody go for the day. We'll be back again next week, and we hope you guys have a great day. Let us know if you have any questions at all. Thank you so much for listening to the Vibrant Health Podcast. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to the information we're sharing. If this information resonated with you and you know others who could benefit from it, we would love it if you'd share it with them. We'd also be very appreciative if you could leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. If you're on our sites or YouTube listening to this, we'll have links down below where you can leave a review. If you're on your phone listening through the app, you can also leave a review directly through the app. It only takes about a minute, super fast, super easy, and your shares and reviews help us reach more people with our message of health and wellness. So we really, really appreciate your support. If you're looking for more information on health and wellness in general, both Lydia and I have a ton of information on our sites. You can find me over at jessicaespinoza.com, which is my main practice website and where I offer my 21-day sugar detox coaching. And in the future, I'm going to be offering nutritional therapy coaching as well. You can also find me on deliciousobsessions.com, which is my main real food and natural living website. You can find Lydia over at divinehealthfromtheinsideout.com, where she offers nutritional therapy consultations and hair tissue mineral analysis services for those who are ready to take their health to the next level. Lastly, if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, we would absolutely love to hear from you. We want these podcasts to be as informational and inspirational as possible, and we'd love to hear from you and understand exactly what you would like us to cover. You can email us or leave a comment below or even give us a shout out on social media. We both look forward to serving you and inspiring you to live the healthiest, happiest lives possible. Thanks for listening.